Welcome to Wheels Through Time Live. Got a great crowd of people here today, and what we're here to talk about today is rare American military motorcycles like the one I'm sitting behind. The conversation today is going to take us primarily through World War II, although there is a really great World War I machine that I will mention at a little bit later time. Ending up in today's discussion, we're actually going to be starting, hopefully, this 1941 Harley-Davidson Knucklehead shaft drive Model TA, serial number 1 of only 17 produced. I haven't run the bike in 5 or 6 years. I've got my guys brought me a can of gas. We have a hot battery to put in it, and we'll go through the basic starting steps to start the 41 TA. By the way, I've had the 41 TA since I think about 1989. I'll tell you a little bit of a story about where I got the motorcycle, as well as some of the other rare military machines in the collection. There's 2 things I want to get out of the way before we start. One is a pop for merchandise at Wheels Through Time. I designed the Military Might hat and t-shirt, and then the other item I wanted to get out of the way is this book right here, Operation and Maintenance Manual, printed in 1942. This is the book that I learned how to work on Harley-Davidsons with. So in about 1969, 1970, when I got my first old bike, I found a copy of this World War II manual. These manuals were built for simple people to read, learn, and operate their motorcycle, and being the simple person that I am, this is how I learned.
Where do you want to pick up from here?
This probably starting in around 1939, Harley-Davidson really understood the need for a military motorcycle. World War II was ramping up, and although they had some success in World War I with various machines, World War II was an entirely different war, different technology, and different needs. Harley-Davidson went to the United States government, and they were contracted to build a 750 motorcycle in great quantities. And we're talking about the Harley-Davidson WLA. The bikes we're going to be talking about today are the Harley-Davidson WLA. The bike is actually, this book is all about. The Harley-Davidson Model XA shaft drive, probably more mystique around the Harley shaft drive XA than nearly any other military motorcycle. The other motorcycles we're going to be talking about would be the Model UA, very low production. It was the bigger engine size. They didn't build many of them. Then kind of the obscure bike that we're going to be talking about that reside here at Wheels Through Time are the 2 right behind me, Air Force 1947 Harley-Davidson military machines. But I'm going to start with the WLA. Over 66,000 WLAs were built. There's actually quite a few in the display. When you came into Wheels Through Time today, you noticed the WLA sitting out front. That machine was owned by a fellow named Frank Nagy. Frank brought that bike back from World War II in pieces, reassembled it, and is proudly here at Wheels Through Time. The other WLA residing right behind me over here, the old green bike, is a bike that is still very much like the TA. It's in its original paint condition. It's never been repainted. I call it off the front, and there are very few original 1942 WLAs in existence. Now, although that might sound like a rare motorcycle, there was actually over 66,000 WLAs produced from 1939 all the way, I think, to around 1945. Subsequently, after World War II, they did produce a WLA bike, a 750 flathead, all the way in the 50s. But we're really primarily talking about today is the World War II version in green, and the bike has some really interesting technical aspects. The bike was actually developed in 1929 as the 750 road bike, and Harley-Davidson realized that the basic road bike they built in 1929, as it carried through its various versions, would make a great utilitarian military bike, capable of doing about anything. If you look at the pictures on the wall behind me, you'll find all kinds of photographs of WLAs in action. Great place to hide behind while you're shooting your Tommy gun. They were used for really nearly everything. Courier service, messenger service, general war purposes. They were all equipped similarly, but slightly different. Every WLA had a gun scabbard, carried either a Thompson, I can't remember the other type of machine gun they carried. They carried an ammunition box on the opposite side, a toolbox, and they all had what was called blackout light equipment. Blackout light equipment, if you look at a WLA, you'll notice on the front of the headlight is sometimes covered with a small slot. And the reason they did that was for a nighttime operating. They didn't want anybody seeing headlights, so it was called blackout equipment. They actually have a little button on the ignition switch on the dashboard. When you turn the switch, push the button, click it one over, it goes into the night mode, which was dim lighting, kind of enough to see that the bike is there, but it didn't really put out any light on the path. The machines were equipped with 18-inch tires, every one of them, heavy-duty knobby tires. If you look at the picture behind me, you'll notice the knobby tires. If you look at the WLA sitting directly in front of the picture, you'll notice that bike is equipped with exactly the same tires. So the WLA, which I could go on for hours, but we don't have hours, was really the primary war horse in World War II. It was nicknamed the Liberator, and it was really the favorite bike among GIs. Although Indians were used in World War II, Harley-Davidson was really the primary machine. In addition to that, one of the other interesting aspects of the WLA was when the boys came home from war, and the ones that were experienced at riding motorcycles on the front certainly thought motorcycling would be a great way to enjoy the rest of their lives. So over the years, many of the Harley-Davidson dealers, friends that I knew for many years, old dealers that I bought out, were World War II veterans, came back from the war, took motorcycling serious. If you go to the back corner of Wheels Through Time, is the old motorcycle shop of George Swim, World War II veteran. He was at Pearl Harbor on December 7th, a true American citizen, opened his Harley dealership in Energy, Illinois, I think in 1949, and his history is entirely here at Wheels Through Time. Now the other bike I wanted to talk about, so I'm going to switch gears quickly here, is the Model XA. And I have several XAs on exhibit here at Wheels Through Time. There's two in the rear of the building that were civilianized, but over here to my right, kind of tucked behind the old flathead 80 or 74 Army bike, is the Model XA. And probably the most asked question here at Wheels Through Time is, what is that motorcycle that looks like a BMW? I think most people that ask the question already know the answer, but the answer is this. That was the Harley-Davidson XA. They were built in 1942 only. There was 1,000 motorcycles built with a shaft drive and the BMW style engine. And I use the word BMW style engine rather loosely, but the real experts that know BMW motorcycles, XA Harley motorcycles, and Zundap motorcycles really take it to heart that the XA is really more of a copy of a German-made Zundap than it is a BMW. Many people ask why did Harley-Davidson build such a motorcycle as the XA? And I think the common answer was for desert use in North Africa is really the rumor or the theory that's spread around. My personal theory is different. I think that the United States government psychologically wanted a machine that was similar to what the Germans used, which was a BMW and a Zundap. And so the United States government contracted with Harley-Davidson to build 1,000 of the XA models. Now the XA model, that were not all the same. They came in several different varieties, driven trim packages. The rarest of the XAs, which is like the bike that I have here at Wheels Through Time, has solid wheels, very much like the front wheel on the shaft drive knucklehead. And only 60 of the XA shaft drives were ever produced with the disc wheels, and I'm really proud to have this one here. I run it pretty regularly, although in the back of the museum, the XA that has 007 on the front fender. That's my favorite XA. It's the 7th one built of the 1000. I started it and run it pretty regularly. I'll start it for you all later today. It's a great running machine. I could go on and on about the XA as I did about the WLA, but I'm going to move on to another version of a WLA, and a most unusual version, and that's like the white bike right behind me, and there's another one up the walkway right there, and that is a pair of Air Force Harley-Davidson motorcycles. Now, if anybody knows anything about American military history, we all realize the Americas did not have an Air Force until 1947. So the common question when I saw the bikes for the first time in Arkansas, when I discovered them, and actually if any of you folks followed our television show What's in the Barn, the 2 Air Force bikes were featured on that particular show. The discovery, the revival, and the restoration of the 3rd bike was all covered in a really interesting show. But the answer to the question, in my opinion, on how a pair of WLA 1942 Harley-Davidsons were set up and marked Air Force, I really think what had happened was when America developed its Air Force, the various, depots or the stations, where the Air Force was stationed, did what they wanted to do. Now the 2 Air Force bikes that I have, the white one here and the other white one, are marked TAV on the front fender, and that's Travis Air Force Base in San Francisco. So my speculation was, or is, that in 1947, when we developed the Air Force, at Travis Air Force Base in San Francisco, whoever was in charge contacted Harley-Davidson and asked them or requisitioned a unit of white motorcycles, and Air Force is white, Army is green, sometimes you'll see Marines in gray, but the white Air Force motorcycles are quite unique. Many of the people that I know that are in the industry of what I do, old motorcycling, look at those white Air Force bikes and say, God, that is just unbelievable. And I have to tell you, when I found the 2 Air Force bikes, I was so surprised. They were chained together in, I believe it was Harrison, Arkansas. A little old lady owned them. Her husband had passed away. We made a deal and brought the machines to Wheels Through Time. One of them I got running immediately and running pretty regularly. The other one, the engine's still seized up and I haven't messed with it. But shortly after that, and part of that television programming, we hooked up with the Home Depot Corporation, and they asked me to restore a World War II Air Force motorcycle in white, and that bike was used in our programming. I was very proud to have the relationship with Home Depot, and I'm actually prouder to have the motorcycle here. After I built the motorcycle for Home Depot, and we used it on various projects with Wounded Warriors, the Home Depot Corporation realized the best use of that motorcycle would be to redonate it to Wheels Through Time. So thank you, Home Depot. The bike's on display. It's sitting out in front. If you walked in, you saw it next to the Army bike. Kind of moving on, and I know we're kind of getting some minutes into the show, and I hope you're all finding some interest in what I'm having to say. But the bike over here to my right is a bike that's extremely important. And although most of the World War II Harley-Davidsons were 750s, they did contract with Harley-Davidson to take the bigger flathead engine and actually a few of the overhead valve engines and build a military machine. So the bike on my right is a 1944 model UA. U is the model of the Harley, A is for Army, and you'll notice this bike is most unusual in the fact it has a left-hand sidecar. Almost all sidecars in America are built on the right-hand side, and this motorcycle indeed was exported to North Africa. In North Africa, in that part of the world, they ride on the opposite side of the road. European motorcycles, many of them have sidecars on the left, and this is a left-hand version of a Model UA. I didn't mention earlier, I did mention where I found the white bikes, but I also wanted to mention the Army bike, the original paint Army bike. because I always like to share a story when I do live on where I found that particular bike, and very shortly I'll be telling you about the Model TA. The Army bike behind me, the old green Army bike, I found in about 1982. There was an ad in a very local trader paper when I lived in southern Illinois, and I went out to see an old German farmer. He had the motorcycle in the back of a hay wagon, all taken apart. Somewhere before that, his son was going to take it apart and restore it. The bike got taken apart and never got put back together. I bought it, hay wagon and all, and loaded up the hay wagon with the bike, brought the bike home. At that time, I was a Harley-Davidson dealer, so I took an old cardboard motorcycle crate, threw all the parts in a bucket of gasoline, swished them all around, threw them out on the cardboard. Name of the game is make the pile of parts smaller, and probably within about 8 hours, I had that motorcycle assembled and running, just like you would do in the book. Now I'm going to tell you a little bit about the UA and where I found it. It was also probably somewhere in the mid-'80s. I was in a big stash of old motorcycles in a little town, and I believe it was in Iowa. I'll think of the name of the town in a moment. And it was an old Harley-Davidson dealer, sold me all of his stuff. A lot of it was out in a field, and so I kind of went through this field and all those buildings and harvested all the parts. And when I got done harvesting the parts, I realized there was a whole pile of parts that were painted powdered blue. And it wasn't hard to figure out that all of those parts were off the same motorcycle. And then as it turned out, the motorcycle was an extremely rare 1944 model UA with the short fenders and all the military garb. I went right to work restoring that bike in the mid-'80s. It's been restored for many years. I don't run it often, but I enjoy running it when I do get it out. Maybe sometime later in the year I'll do that. And that kind of brings us to the Model TA. But before I tell you about the TA, or before we try to start the Model TA, I want to share some of the treasures in the military exhibit here at Wheels Through Time. And there really are some real treasures. You'll notice some new engines in the crate. You'll also notice behind this crate engine, right over there, there's a very unusual unit. It's not Harley-Davidson, but it is military. It's not World War II, it's World War I. And what that is a 1927 Indian 350cc motorcycle engine that was commissioned to be produced by I don't know who into a power generator. And it's the most unusual relic. Behind that relic is another relic. It's World War II. It's not Harley-Davidson, it's Indian. And it's very similar to the very rare Indian Viapose model, similar to the Harley XA. And it's a hydraulic power unit for a bomber airplane and auxiliary power unit. So on the bomber airplane, if the hydraulic power unit didn't work, they would crank up the Indian engine, hooked up to a hydraulic pump, pull the lever, and that would operate the hydraulic systems on a World War II bomber, a most unusual relic. Some of the other relics in the collection are genuine old WLA Army parts, pistons in boxes, gaskets in boxes, crates full of old motorcycle parts that I've collected over the years, and they're here for you to enjoy. So anyway, without further ado, I'm going to tell you a little bit about what we're working on here right now. And this is a 1941 Harley-Davidson Model TA. TA standing for Test Army. And if you look this motorcycle over, it's most unusual because it's really kind of a monster all-terrain vehicle that features a knucklehead engine with a 3-speed transmission. But most unusual, it has a shaft drive. Now, there was only 17 of these motorcycles ever built. I don't really call it a prototype. Prototypes are generally considered something that was built and tested and then eventually produced. So I think probably the formal terminology would be a failed prototype. Harley-Davidson built this for the Army. It didn't make the cut. The Jeep was coming out right about the same time, and in the end, there was only 17 of these built. Now, there's a lot of documentation on the TA. There's more written documentation on the TA for a model of only 17 Harleys ever built. I think there's more written documentation on this rare prototype than any other rare prototype they've ever built. I don't really know why, other than the fact that the machine is quite special. What we do know about the Model TA is there was 16 of these bikes built for the United States government, and there was one built for the Canadian government, and this happens to be the Canadian prototype. The serial number is 41TA1100, easy to see on the left crankcase, and I've had the bike since I think 1989. I'll tell you a little bit about how I found it many years ago. But first I want to tell you about some of the special equipment on the TA. Starting in the front, it's got the disc wheel. Moving up the way, the fork is actually longer than a regular model because the bike is bigger. They've made that fork longer primarily in the upper area of the fork. The frame, of course, is totally unique to itself. It's the first Harley to use 5-gallon gas tanks, and the next time Harley used a set of gas tanks like this was around 1965. The machine also carries the most unusual 70-mile-per-hour speedometer. The box on the back was kind of a dual purpose. Originally, this box had a padding on the back, although there is documentation of a TA as a personnel carrier. Actually had 2 seats on the back where somebody would sit way up on this thing while somebody's driving it. I couldn't imagine what that was like. The shaft drive and all the components in the back are unique. The rear end or the differential, I've had a lot of people speculate on what they thought it is or is. It is some kind of utility Jeep model, probably made by the Dana company, narrowed for the purpose of this. And then of course it has the solid wheels on the rear as well. The other thing I wanted to mention about this particular TA, it's the only original paint, original condition TA known. Now, since I've had this bike since 1989, I've been able to learn a lot about the history of the TA, where the existing models are at, and I can run through that right now. My good friend and grandpa of Harley-Davidson, Willie G. Davidson, he has a Model TA. His was found in Wisconsin. It was restored probably about 20 years ago. It resides at his house. And I've seen that machine, privileged to see that machine one time. There's another one of these secretly hiding in Carson City, Nevada. I was privy to look at that bike personally probably about 15 years ago. There's 2 of these bikes reportedly in Florida that no longer have the knucklehead engine. They were updated at some time with a panhead engine, and I've heard rumors of those bikes for many, many years. As far as complete bikes, that's really the inventory that's known. However, here at Wheels Through Time in the very far back corner shop, if you peek your head in there, there's 2 more of these in parts. And so over the years, I was able to find not only this complete running machine, but 2 partial machines. I don't know exactly what I'm going to do with them. The future will tell that. I think it's probably about time to try to start this bike. Did somebody bring me a battery somewhere for this machine? Chris, here's our battery. This is Chris. He's going to help me out here. And let me get my specs on. Now this is like any other Harley-Davidson. It's a 6-volt system. I'm going to use one tool to start this bike, my very Harley-Davidson screwdriver. Also, while I'm doing this, I wanted to mention, and you're welcome to look at the box, in the box of the shaft drive knucklehead. This is a World War II field military repair kit for repairing a WLA Harley. I've never seen another one. All the tools are in there. It's all brand new, and it is another one of the great relics here at Wheels Through Time. So what I'm doing is what I'm not supposed to be doing. I'm hooking the negative up first, because you're always supposed to hook the positive up first, but I'm in a hurry. Okay, so I've got the battery hooked up. Now I've run this bike regularly since 1989. Got a headlight?
Nope.
You know why? It's not hooked up.
Oh,
I think it's still going to start. We're going to add some gas in a minute, but real quickly, let me tell you where I found the motorcycle. In 1932, there was a Harley-Davidson dealer in Hammond, Indiana. His name is Harry Molinar. You might see some of other Harry's items here at Wheel Street Time. Ironically, I ended up with many of Harry's rare things, including the shaft drive knucklehead. Harry was really good friends with the founding fathers of Harley-Davidson. It is legendary that somewhere in the 30s, in the Harley's tough times, Harry Molinar, like many dealers, chipped in and loaned Harley-Davidson money to keep him in business. So he was very good friends with the founding fathers of Harley-Davidson. And then through the years, Harry was literally able to go to the Harley factory and get stuff. And I'm talking about a lot of stuff. I was at Harry's shop probably in the early 80s. I wish I was there in the 60s. He had a 3-story building in Hammond, Indiana that was completely packed with Harley-Davidson motorcycle parts. He owned the Indiana Motorcycle Speedway. Him and his wife ran that dealership from 1934 to 1990. He was ousted by Harley-Davidson during their years when they were hard on their dealers, and it really almost killed Harry when he lost his dealership. Harry and I had a very good bond over the years, and although when I got to Harry's stuff, a lot of his stuff had been picked over, a lot of his parts had. Most ironically, Harry only sold me a few things. Upstairs there's a midget race car. He sold me some parts occasionally, but over the years, and Harry was well known and it was written about in actually several books with Harry's collection. He had a little mini museum at his dealership. But over the years, I've ended up with many of Harry's very rare items. His factory hill climbers, his model CAC. Upstairs is the little midget race car, which he sold me. On the main floor down here is the knucklehead tri-car. It says Molinar Harley-Davidson on the side. And then going through the building, there's actually quite a bit of Harry here. His DNA is here, and I hope he's with us here today. So what we're going to do right now is we're going to add some gas to this. And as I had mentioned, I got this thing in '89. When I got it, it was not running. I took part of the engine apart, fixed what I had to fix, made it run, and the bike has never failed me, and I don't think it's going to fail me today. So now we need some gasoline. Chris, do you mind? I think we're going to go with this side over here. Let's go. What you hope for when you put gas in a bike, it doesn't leak all over the place. And we'll know about that in just a minute, because whenever you let a bike sit for a long time, many times the carburetor will plug up, and I'm really going on faith and my knowledge of owning this bike for that many years that this bike's going to crank right up. A little more. We want to get it good and ready. That's good. Okay, so gasoline in the bike, batteries in the bike. 1941 to 1965, Harley had the same fuel shut off, so I'm going to turn the gas on right now. It's not that loud.
Oh, okay.
He's confident it's going to start because he's already covering his area.
He says it's not that loud.
Okay, it's not leaking yet. So the general starting procedure on any Harley, new or old, is to turn the choke on and give it about 3 kicks. Wow. That's 1. That's 2. That's 3. Then you turn the key on, and it should start right up. Yeah. Woo!
Where you going, Dale? Question is, it'll break for
Forgot to mention it's got reverse. That's all we got for live today. Hope you enjoyed it.